Racist billionaire dad watches. Waiter feed his disabled son. And the billionaire had seen it all. Greedy people, fake smiles, and those who only cared about money. But in a crowded restaurant, he saw something different. A young waiter silently knelt beside his disabled son and did something so pure, so unexpected, it left him speechless. She thought no one noticed. But the moment the billionaire stood up, her entire life changed. The pristine white tablecloths of Azura, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Marcus Chen surveyed his empire from a corner table. At 53, the tech billionaire's silver-streaked hair and tailored Armani suit projected power, but his eyes, cold and calculating, revealed a man who'd built his fortune by seeing people as either assets or obstacles. Tonight was different. Beside him sat his 17-year-old son, Oliver, slumped slightly in his wheelchair, cerebral palsy limiting his movements, but not the intelligence behind his eyes. Marcus had brought Oliver here reluctantly, an obligation fulfilled after cancelling 3 previous dinner plans. The other diners cast sideways glances, not at the famous billionaire, but at his disabled son who occasionally made involuntary sounds that disrupted the restaurant's carefully cultivated atmosphere. "Sir, would you prefer a more private table?" the maitre d' suggested with practiced discretion, eyes darting nervously toward Oliver. "We're fine here," Marcus replied curtly, scrolling through emails on his phone. At the next table, an elderly white couple whispered, their eyes fixed on Oliver. "People like that should eat at home," the woman muttered, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. His jaw tightened, not in defense of his son, but in embarrassment. Maya Rodriguez approached their table, brown skin glistening with sweat after 6 straight hours on shift. At 24, she carried the weight of her immigrant grandmother's medical bills and her own deferred dreams of medical school on her shoulders. She'd learned to be invisible in spaces like this, the perfect server for wealthy patrons who barely registered her presence beyond her utility. "Good evening, I'm Maya. I'll be serving you tonight," she said, placing menus before them. Marcus barely looked up, but Oliver's eyes met hers with a warmth that caught her off guard. When Oliver's hand spasmed, knocking over his water glass, the elderly couple sighed dramatically. "I'm so sorry," Maya said automatically, though it wasn't her fault. As she mopped up the spill, she noticed Oliver struggling to communicate. While Marcus impatiently ordered for both of them, Maya leaned slightly toward Oliver. "Would you like something else to drink?" she asked him directly, not his father. Oliver's fingers tapped his communication device, but his father interrupted. "He'll have water. Just be more careful serving him." Maya nodded, but as she turned away, she caught the look in Oliver's eyes, the silent plea of someone used to being spoken for, decided for, invisible in plain sight. It was a look she recognized from her own grandmother, who'd cleaned houses for families who never bothered to learn to pronounce her name correctly. During the main course, Oliver struggled with his fork. Marcus glanced at his watch repeatedly, irritation tightening his features as Oliver's coordination failed him. Maya approached, noticing how Oliver's food remained untouched, while his father had nearly finished. "Sir, would you like me to assist your son?" Maya asked quietly. "That's not your job," Marcus snapped, then added more softly, glancing around. "We're fine." But they weren't fine, and Maya saw the hunger and frustration in Oliver's eyes. In that moment, something inside her rebelled against years of learned invisibility. Without asking again, she knelt beside Oliver's wheelchair. "Would you like some help?" she asked him directly, her voice gentle but firm. Oliver's eyes widened, then he nodded almost imperceptibly. The restaurant seemed to still as Maya carefully, respectfully began to help Oliver eat, maintaining his dignity with each bite she offered. She didn't rush him. She didn't speak to him as if he were a child. She simply helped one human being nourish himself, kneeling beside his wheelchair as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Marcus watched, frozen between embarrassment and something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, as his son, his brilliant, often neglected son, smiled at this waitress who had seen him when so many, including his own father, looked past him. Maya's shift ended at midnight. As she trudged toward the subway, her manager's words echoed in her mind. "The Chen party left you a $10,000 tip." She'd stared at the receipt in disbelief, unable to process that a single act of kindness had temporarily solved her family's financial crisis. But with the windfall came a handwritten note. "Come to Chen Tower tomorrow, 9 a.m. Marcus Chen." The gleaming skyscraper loomed over her the next morning, its glass exterior reflecting clouds that people like Maya could only look up at. The security guard's eyes narrowed as she approached, her worn jacket and sensible shoes marking her as an outsider. "I have an appointment with Mr. Chen," she said, voice steadier than her nerves. "Name?" he asked, skeptically. "Maya Rodriguez." He checked his tablet, surprise registering on his face. 65th floor. In Marcus's office, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's view of the city. He sat behind a desk that cost more than her grandmother's medical bills, Oliver nowhere in sight. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Rodriguez," Marcus said, gesturing to a chair. "What you did for my son last night was unexpected." "It was nothing, sir, just part of my job," Maya replied, uncomfortable with the attention. Marcus steepled his fingers. "I've had a proposition drawn up. I'd like to offer you a position as Oliver's personal assistant. The salary is substantial, enough to pay for your grandmother's medical care and your medical school tuition." Maya's heart raced. It was everything she needed, bundled in an impossible offer. "How did you know about—" "I make it my business to know things, Ms. Rodriguez," Marcus interrupted. "Your grandmother's dialysis costs, your deferred admission to Columbia Medical School. I've found when people need something badly enough, they're more reliable." The subtext was clear. This wasn't charity but a transaction. Her need made her controllable. "The position would require you to live at our home," Marcus continued. "Your primary responsibility would be Oliver's care and companionship." "What about my grandmother?" Maya asked. "Arrangements can be made to relocate her to a care facility near our home." The offer dangled before her, a golden cage. Maya thought of Oliver's eyes, intelligent and kind, so different from his father's calculating gaze. "May I speak with Oliver about this?" she asked. Something flashed across Marcus's face. Annoyance, perhaps. "Oliver doesn't make these decisions." "But it's his life I'd be part of," Maya countered, surprising herself with her boldness. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Very well. Follow me." Oliver's room was a stark contrast to Marcus's office, walls covered with advanced physics equations and astronomical charts. When Oliver saw Maya, his face lit up, his communication device quickly tapping out, "You came." "Oliver, I've offered Ms. Rodriguez a position as your personal assistant," Marcus explained. Oliver's eyes widened, his fingers flying over his device. "Did you ask if that's what she wants?" Maya felt a surge of warmth toward this perceptive young man. Over the next hour, as they talked, truly talked, with Marcus growing increasingly uncomfortable at the margins, Maya learned that Oliver was a brilliant astrophysicist whose papers had been published in scientific journals. His father's dismissive attitude stemming not just from Oliver's disability, but from his inability to understand his son's genius. That night, Maya discussed the offer with her grandmother, Abuela Lucia, whose hands bore the calluses of 50 years cleaning homes for families like the Chens. "This man, he sees you as property to buy," Abuela said softly in Spanish. "But the boy, he sees you." "The money would change everything for us," Maya countered. "Money changes circumstances," not people, Abuela replied. You must decide if helping this boy is worth working for a man who values people only for their usefulness. The next day, Maya discovered through subtle questions to other staff that Marcus had gone through 3 previous assistants for Oliver in the past year, all fired for becoming too attached or for encouraging unrealistic independence. The mansion's housekeeper, Mrs. Kim, pulled Maya aside. Mr. Chen doesn't want help for his son, she whispered. He wants someone to keep Oliver contained, managed. The last assistant was fired for helping Oliver apply to present his research at a conference. Maya's stomach sank as she realized the true nature of the position. Not to assist Oliver in living his fullest life, but to be the velvet glove over his father's controlling hand. When she encountered Marcus in the hallway, his phone conversation made her blood run cold. The facility has agreed to our terms, he was saying. After my trip to Tokyo, we'll move forward with Oliver's placement. It's for the best. His condition is becoming more visible with age. He noticed Maya and ended the call abruptly. Ah, Ms. Rodriguez, have you decided to accept my offer? Behind him, Oliver appeared in his doorway, his face ashen. He had heard everything. The silence in the hallway stretched like a live wire as Oliver's eyes met Maya's, then shifted to his father with a new understanding dawning in them. His fingers trembled over his communication device, typing a single word. Facility? Marcus turned, his expression shifting from surprise to practiced patience. Oliver, you shouldn't be eavesdropping. We'll discuss this later. Oliver's device clattered rapidly. You're sending me away? It's a specialized research center, Marcus replied smoothly. Your physicians agree it's the best environment for your condition. Maya watched Oliver's face transform, shock giving way to a lifetime of realizations cascading through his eyes. His next typed words appeared slowly, deliberately. My condition embarrasses you. That's nonsense, Marcus said, but his eyes darted toward Maya, conscious of the witness to this unraveling. This is a family matter, Ms. Rodriguez. Perhaps you could give us some privacy. Maya hesitated, torn between professional boundaries and the silent plea in Oliver's eyes. Before she could decide, Oliver's device spoke for him, the mechanical voice lending an eerie flatness to his words. Stay. Please. Something in that plea, the simple human need to not face injustice alone, rooted Maya to the spot. She nodded slightly. Marcus's jaw tightened. Very well, Oliver, we can discuss this like reasonable people. The facility has an excellent reputation and… Oliver's device cut him off. Is it my papers? My research? Did someone tell you I'm presenting at Princeton next month? A flicker of confusion crossed Marcus's face. What presentation? Professor Watkins invited me. My work on quantum chromodynamics. Marcus laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Oliver, those equations, they're just your hobby. Your doctors explained that the patterns help you cope, but they're not actual science? Oliver's device finished. His hands shook with anger now, not palsy, as he activated a holographic display from his wheelchair's integrated system. Complex mathematical equations bloomed in the air between them. This is my presentation, the mechanical voice continued as Oliver typed. 6 years of work, 3 published papers. I'm the youngest recipient of the Shockley Fellowship in Theoretical Physics. Marcus stared at the equations, then at his son, genuine bewilderment replacing his condescension. That's impossible. You never asked, Oliver's device interjected. You never looked. Do you know who did? Professor Watkins found my paper online. A stranger saw what my father couldn't. Maya watched Marcus's worldview visibly shatter, his perception of his son reforming before her eyes. But in that vulnerable moment, instead of openness, she saw his walls rebuilding. his need for control reasserting itself. "Why wasn't I informed about this presentation?" Marcus demanded. "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this," Oliver replied through his device. "Making it about you, about control." "I am your father," Marcus said, voice rising. "And legally I'm 17, Oliver interrupted. "In 8 months I'll be an adult, and you'll have no say in where I live or what facility you send me to." The corridor fell silent again as father and son stared at each other across a chasm of misunderstanding years in the making. Then, with devastating quietness, Oliver's device spoke again. "Did you ever wonder why Mom left?" Marcus flinched as if struck. "Your mother left because she couldn't handle the responsibility of—" "She left because you couldn't see me," Oliver typed. "She calls me every week. She'll be at my presentation. She sees me." Maya watched the color drain from Marcus's face as another pillar of his carefully constructed narrative crumbled. His ex-wife hadn't abandoned their disabled son. She'd maintained a relationship with him that Marcus knew nothing about. "Oliver, I've provided everything for you," Marcus said, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. "The best doctors, the best education, things," Oliver replied. "Not time, not understanding. At the restaurant, you wouldn't even help me eat." Maya felt herself flush as she was suddenly central to their conflict. "You let a stranger help me instead," Oliver continued. "And she didn't help because she pitied me. She helped because she saw me struggling and thought, that person deserves dignity." The words hung in the air, simple but profound. Marcus turned to Maya, his expression unreadable. "Is that true? You didn't feel sorry for him?" Maya squared her shoulders. "I saw someone who needed assistance maintaining their dignity, sir. Not someone to pity." "And you didn't think it was beneath you?" Marcus pressed. "Beneath me?" Maya repeated, genuinely confused. "To help another human being? No, Mr. Chen. Where I come from, that's called being human." In the silence that followed, Oliver moved his wheelchair forward, positioning himself between Maya and his father, a physical declaration of autonomy that spoke volumes. "I won't go to any facility," he stated through his device. "I'm presenting at Princeton, I'm finishing my degree, and then I'm living independently." Marcus stared at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. The arrogance drained from his posture, replaced by something that might have been shame, or perhaps the beginning of understanding. "I never knew," he whispered. "All these years." "You never tried to know," Oliver replied, the mechanical voice unable to convey the sorrow behind the words. 3 months later, Maya stood at the back of a packed lecture hall at Princeton University, watching Oliver Chen present his groundbreaking research on quantum chromodynamics to an audience of the world's leading physicists. His voice synthesizer had been upgraded to a more natural-sounding system, but it was the confidence with which he presented, answering complex questions with brilliant insights, that held the room spellbound. In the front row sat Marcus Chen, his usual imperious demeanor replaced by something more complex. Pride mingled with lingering regret. Beside him was a woman Maya recognized from photos as Oliver's mother, Catherine, who occasionally reached over to touch Marcus's arm when Oliver made a particularly insightful point, a tentative bridge across years of bitterness. Maya had declined Marcus's job offer, but had negotiated something different, a foundation, funded by Chen Technologies, providing scholarships for disabled students in STEM fields, and financial support for low-income families with disabled children. Maya worked there part-time while attending medical school, her grandmother now receiving treatment at a top medical facility, not as charity, but as part of Maya's employment package. After the standing ovation for Oliver's presentation, Maya found herself in the reception area, watching the changed dynamics of the Chen family from a distance. Oliver was surrounded by admiring professors, his father hovering nearby, not controlling, but still learning how to simply be present. He looks at him differently now, came a voice beside her. It was Catherine, Oliver's mother, elegant in her simplicity. Yes, Maya agreed, but there's still a long way to go. Catherine nodded. 20 years of habits don't change in 3 months, but there's movement. She studied Maya with curious eyes. Oliver told me what you did at the restaurant. Such a small act with such large consequences. Maya shrugged uncomfortably. I just did what anyone should have done. But they didn't. You did. Catherine's eyes were kind but knowing. The foundation was your idea, wasn't it? Not Marcus's. Maya smiled slightly. Let's just say I suggested that true atonement requires systemic change, not just personal growth. Catherine laughed softly. Well, you've changed more than my ex-husband. Look at Oliver. Across the room, Oliver was engaged in animated conversation with Professor Watkins, his movements more fluid with his new adaptive technology, his face alight with the joy of being truly seen by his peers. He always had that brilliance, Catherine said, but now he has confidence too. That's new. As the reception wound down, Marcus approached Maya, his demeanor still awkward but sincere. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm glad you could come. I wouldn't have missed it, Maya replied. Marcus cleared his throat. The Foundation's first round of scholarships went out last week. 27 students. He paused. It doesn't erase what I... He stopped himself. Well, it's a start. Yes, Maya agreed. A start. Later, as Maya prepared to leave, Oliver maneuvered his wheelchair toward her, his new system allowing him to control it with subtle head movements. Thank you for coming, he said through his synthesizer, the voice now carrying inflections that matched the joy in his eyes. Your presentation was brilliant, Maya replied, though I only understood about 10% of it. Oliver laughed, an actual laugh, his body expressing what his voice synthesizer couldn't. Most of the audience only understood about 60%, if I'm being honest. They shared a smile, and in that moment, Maya felt the full circle of their connection, from the restaurant where she'd knelt beside a hungry young man, to this prestigious hall where he stood as an intellectual equal among giants. What happens now? She asked. I've been offered a research position, Oliver replied. And Dad's different. Not perfect, but trying. Last week he actually asked what he could do to help adapt our home better for my needs. First time ever. Maya nodded. Small steps. Maya? Oliver said, suddenly serious. People like him. They're not born seeing the world that way. They're taught, and they can be untaught. As Maya walked away from Princeton that evening, she thought about systems of privilege and power, how they shape people's vision, determining who is seen and who remains invisible. She thought about her grandmother, who had cleaned the homes of wealthy families for decades, and how many of them had never really seen her. She thought about Oliver, brilliant and kind, who had spent years being defined by what he couldn't do, rather than celebrated for who he was. Change was possible. She had witnessed it in Marcus Chen, but it required more than individual transformations. It required dismantling systems that taught some people to look past others, that valued certain types of ability over basic human dignity. The foundation was a start. Her medical degree would be another step. Each person who learned to truly see others, not as their usefulness or limitation, but as their complete humanity, represented another crack in those systems. As night fell over Princeton, Maya looked up at the stars Oliver studied with such passion, distant, brilliant points of light that seemed fixed, but were, in fact, constantly moving, constantly changing, just like people, if given the chance. The universe, in all its complexity, asked a simple question. In a world where it's so easy to look past each other, what becomes possible when we truly learn to see?